What if the most insulated homes ever designed for Arctic winters featured no glass windows, no chimneys, no fiberglass insulation, and yet surpassed many contemporary houses in performance? For centuries, Viking settlements have been pictured as harsh and unforgiving spots. Snow blanketed the earth. Winds pierced every gap. Darkness packed smoke-filled cabins where enduring meant ongoing suffering. That vision seems reasonable, yet it is incorrect. Archaeology reveals a subtler, more intriguing narrative. Viking societies didn't just survive winter. They thrived within it year upon year, era upon era, constructing dwellings that operated not despite the chill, but thanks to a deep comprehension of it. No sorcery was at play. No epic battle with the elements, no infinite stacks of logs. Rather, there was ingenuity, refined, layered, and interconnected. Each component of a Viking dwelling collaborated. The soil below it, the density of its barriers, the circulation of air, the warmth from inhabitants, the path of fumes. Nothing stood alone. Heat was conserved meticulously. Breezes were barred entry, and resources were treated as finite. To the Vikings, winter wasn't a foe to vanquish. It was a state to regulate. In a realm where frost ruled much of the calendar, where fuel was limited, and where gusts could rob heat quicker than flames could restore it, they posed a distinct query from ours today. Not how to generate additional warmth, but how to retain more of it. That pivotal change in perspective transformed all aspects, from the dirt embedded in their fortifications to the gentle drift of vapors under their ceilings. What they erected wasn't mere refuge. It was a framework crafted to sustain existence when the exterior world sought to ice it over. The Viking longhouse wasn't a structure in the current definition. It wasn't a fixed entity aimed at segregating folks from the outdoors. It was a breathing entity. Excavated sites throughout Scandinavia, Iceland, and Greenland uncover edifices extending 20, 40, occasionally over 80 meters long. Whole groups resided under one canopy. Households rested adjacent. Seniors labored close to the fire pit. Young ones navigated communal areas. Work, repose, and endurance occurred in unison. This wasn't overcrowding from compulsion. It was intentional architecture. Human forms emit heat steadily. By clustering scores of individuals in one confined area, Vikings converted communal closeness into a sustainable heat supply. Warmth was distributed, safeguarded, and circulated merely by cohabiting. No one battled the freeze solo. Even the contour of the longhouse mirrored this rationale. Its softly arched sides, reminiscent of Viking vessel hulls, permitted winds to glide past the edifice rather than assault it directly. These weren't random shapes. Viking constructors were mariners foremost, pioneers of traversing adverse settings. They transferred nautical expertise to land and integrated it into building. The dwelling didn't oppose the gale. It directed it. Within each pursuit, slumbering, toiling, assembling, contributed to a unified thermal network. Akin to a vessel's team weathering a frigid tempest offshore, all aboard the longhouse formed part of a collective endurance apparatus. The edifice thrived because its occupants did. Contrary to common depictions of Viking abodes, they weren't assembled like timber lodges piled with wood. In numerous Viking locales, particularly Iceland and Greenland, lumber was sparse, vulnerable, and excessively precious to squander on bulky barriers that leaked warmth to the breeze. Forests required ages to mature. Winter came annually. Thus, the Vikings selected an alternative substance. They opted for the terrain underfoot. Huge sod chunks were sliced straight from the soil, strata of earth interlaced by thick turf roots. These chunks were piled into barriers that might attain 2 meters wide at the foundation, tapering upward. The outcome wasn't primitive. It was calculated, sturdy, and remarkably effective. The genius of sod resides in science, not aesthetics. Dirt harbors innumerable pockets of immobile air, and stagnant air ranks among the strongest insulators recognized. Well before contemporary research quantified thermal resistance, Viking artisans grasped this via practice. Heat remained where air stayed still. Their fortifications turned into innate heat reservoirs. Soil repelled the blast. Roots secured the framework. Air voids decelerated heat dissipation to a minimum. Gradually, vegetation regrew over the barriers, reinforcing the edifice more. The dwelling ceased to be positioned on the terrain. It merged with it. What the Vikings fashioned didn't detach them from the wild. It harnessed the wild to preserve them. Flames by themselves were insufficient to maintain a Viking family through the cold season. Inside the Longhouse, people didn't dwell separately. They coexisted with beasts. In the harshest periods, cattle, lambs, caprines, and equines were ushered indoors, claiming substantial portions of the identical edifice where humans dozed, labored, and dined. To today's eyes, this could appear rustic. To the Vikings, it was exact resource oversight. A breathing creature is a thermal generator. One bovine yields as much corporal heat as multiple current electric warmers operating nonstop. Scale that to a flock, and you get a consistent, dependable heat origin that never extinguishes, never demands fuel, and never halts during the dark hours. The Longhouse was engineered to exploit this fully. Animal zones were positioned marginally lower than human quarters. As creatures inhaled and stirred, heated air ascended naturally, streaming into zones where folks congregated and rested. Warmth shifted where required sans exertion or meddling. No conduits, no devices, no extra combustion. Just life steered by construction. The Vikings recognized that comfort didn't need fabrication from zero. It could be exchanged, rerouted, and upheld by extant vital processes. In the Longhouse, heat ambled, respired, and dwelled beside the individuals it shielded. Chill alone seldom destroys. Gales do. The Vikings comprehended a principle that modern planning frequently overlooks. Circulating air is the swiftest method to pilfer heat from the body and from a residence. A serene, icy evening can be withstood. A blustery one can siphon warmth swifter than fire can replenish it. Hence, Viking building emphasized not combating degrees, but managing ventilation. Leaks were viewed as perils. That's why Viking abodes had virtually no apertures, not due to deficient ability or assets, but because breaches were vulnerabilities. Glazing was uncommon and expensive, but even if plentiful, windows remained perforations in a home's heat shield. Shadow was preferable to vulnerability. Barriers were constructed dense and hermetically closed. Portals were maintained short and slim, compelling entrance to stoop upon ingress. This wasn't emblematic deference. It was mechanics. A diminutive gap equated to reduced frigid influx and diminished warm efflux. Numerous longhouses incorporated a brief ingress corridor or antechamber, an uncooled cushion area that mitigated the jolt of external atmosphere prior to infiltrating the habitat. It operated like a primitive pressure chamber, predating the term. Within a Viking abode, warmth was protected vigilantly. It was never permitted to depart readily. At the core of the Viking longhouse smoldered a blaze distinct from those in present-day residences. This wasn't a hearth affixed to a partition. It was an elongated exposed firebed that traversed the building's core, at times spanning over 10 meters end to end. It formed the residence's thermal spine. Rock-lined depressions under the blaze soaked up heat during combustion, then dispensed that comfort gradually across hours, even post-flame diminishment. In areas where arboreals were rare, peat substituted timber. Combusted uniformly, consistently, and much longer, delivering dependable warmth sans perpetual oversight. The firebed accomplished more than heating the zone. It supplied illumination in the extended winter gloom, prepared meals, it desiccated garments. It evolved into the communal hub of the family where individuals assembled to labor, consume, narrate tales, and slumber. Existence arranged around this blaze. And yet, no flue existed. Per current norms, this ought to have been lethal. Fumes should have saturated the space, asphyxiating all. But Viking artisans comprehended airflow and thermal dynamics sufficiently to render the setup functional. The blaze wasn't a solitary element. It was woven into the whole edifice, component of a broader mechanism aimed at retaining comfort and restraining hazard. Within the Viking longhouse, vapors didn't vanish. They ascended leisurely and accumulated under the canopy. This wasn't a defect in the blueprint. It was integral to the mechanism. As the blaze ignited, scorching vapors created a toasty stratum near the apex, forming an unseen cover that confined heat beneath where folks resided and dozed. Comfort was secured in position, not permitted to flee skyward into the frosty ether. Concurrently, the vapors fulfilled another role. Residue adhered to timber rafters and ceiling braces, layering them in a fine defensive coating. Pests were repelled. Damp harm decelerated. Decay was postponed. The residence was safeguarded internally day by day. Viking artisans regulated this meticulously. Modifiable sealing outlets permitted vapors to exit as required, but never entirely. In cold seasons, those outlets remained almost sealed. Atmosphere purity was intentionally compromised for comfort. The dwelling didn't respire openly. It respired deliberately. Ease ranked second. Endurance ranked first. In Viking building, the canopy was as crucial as the barriers, occasionally more so. It wasn't a slender shield intended to repel precipitation. It was a vital stratum of defense. Underneath, panels of birch rind were precisely positioned to form a moisture-proof membrane. Above that, dense sod strata were heaped, compacting beneath their mass. Upon completion, the canopy could mass several tons. This heft wasn't a load. It was thermal resistance. The ponderous canopy impeded heat egress, steadied inner climates, and anchored the entire framework solidly to the soil, securing it versus unyielding winter blasts. Abrupt climate fluctuations were moderated. Comfort persisted extended. Gradually, flora rooted over the canopy. Fibers intertwined the sod layers, closing fissures and protecting the birch rind beneath from rays, downpour, and deterioration. The canopy mended itself merely by remaining undisturbed. The residence did more than protect its inhabitants. It evolved with the cycles. It adjusted. It expanded. What endured under the frost wasn't an inert construct, but a vibrant prolongation of the terrain proper. Whereas current people hastened to clear snow, the Vikings permitted it to accumulate. They grasped what snow truly represented. Not an adversary, but thermal barrier. Snow ensnares innumerable voids of motionless air amid its flakes, rendering it one of the top innate insulators on the planet. As winter gales heaped mound upon mound against longhouse barriers and canopies, those strata caulked crevices, obstructed blasts, and retarded heat depletion. What appeared as entombment was in fact safeguarding. Whole Viking hamlets could disappear under snow accumulations, with solely portals and slender plumes of vapors apparent against the pale vista. Beneath that icy shield, the climate near the barriers lingered near zero, vastly milder than the severe exterior. The snow cushioned sharp climate shifts. The gale was excluded. Comfort remained within. The residence no longer faced winter bare. It was enveloped in it. And past those barriers of soil, sod, and snow, the freeze was confined where it should be externally. So why did Viking hamlets never succumb to ice? Not because they produced boundless warmth. Not because they incinerated more resources than others, but because they comprehended something we frequently disregard. Warmth isn't fabricated. It's conserved. The Vikings didn't conceive in terms of edifices. They conceived in networks, every facet counted. Soil compacted into barriers, beasts cohabiting areas, blaze inset into rock, vapors retained under the canopy, snow allowed to settle and secure the construct, and human conduct molded by winter's constraints. Nothing functioned independently. Heat was decelerated, exchanged, reused, and defended at each phase. Depletion was reduced prior to requiring added comfort. The residence became a prolongation of the surroundings instead of a blockade against it. Their abodes didn't combat the wild. They harmonized with it, and through that, Viking groups forged habitats able to uphold life in locales where numerous current structures would falter without perpetual power supply. This isn't folklore. This isn't fable. This is ancestral ingenuity, the overlooked architectural acumen of humankind's history. and it poses a subtle inquiry that remains pertinent now. What more have we overlooked that once preserved our survival?